In a nutshell, a space warp can be defined as a non-rendering object that's used to affect the appearance or behavior of something else in a scene. They can be used to create a wide variety of effects, from object-deforming space warps capable of creating things like waves and ripples on a 3D surface, to force-like space warps used in a scene to generate atmospheric effects like wind and gravity. There's even a special subset of space warps that are designed to be used as deflectors, having particles pointing in the direction of the space warp bounce or deflect off that space warp surface. So there's a lot of different types of space warps that Max offers in order to achieve a certain visual effect. In this video, we'll be looking specifically at affecting particles with wind. To show you some of the various options when using the wind space warp, I'll be using a file named Wind Space Warp. You can find it in the Working Files folder. Let's play back the camera view real quick so we can see how things currently look. Okay, let's see what we can do. Found in the Create column under their own tab, space warps are located just to the right of the Helpers menu. The icon looks like 3 horizontal wavy lines. They're divided into specific categories, all depending on their type. The big 3 are forces, deflectors, and geometric deformable, which work not on particles but on surface geometry. Atmospheric effects like wind and gravity are found under the forces. Let's say that we'd like to add a little wind to the superspray particles that are shooting up from the system's icon emitter. Like with creating most of Max's particle systems, a space warp's orientation in a scene, in other words, the direction the space warp points, affects how it works. Let's create a wind space warp in our left-hand view. By using the left-hand window when creating, you can see the direction that makes the wind point in the camera view. Let's take that camera view full screen. We'll activate the window, then type Alt-W for the keyboard shortcut. Why don't we move the wind icon a little to the left, then we'll scrub our timeline to see how things look. As we scrub the timeline, you'll notice that the wind, as of yet, doesn't seem to be having any effect on the particles. The reason being is the space warp will need to be connected to, or in other words, associated with, the particle system that it's supposed to control. That connecting process has an official name. It's called Bind to Space Warp. It's a command that can be found on the upper left-hand side of the toolbar, just to the right of the 2 link commands. It works by dragging the particle system icon to the space warp icon. Let's do that. Putting our mouse on the superspray, you'll notice the cursor changing. Holding down will now drag that over to the wind space warp. When we see the mouse cursor changing again, we'll go ahead and let go of our left mouse button. Now after we do that, let's go back to our move command. That simply gets us back out of the bind to space warp option. After doing so, if we select the superspray, we'll be able to see the space warp binding to it in the modify column. That binding easily turned on and off by clicking on the light bulb to the left of the entry. Okay, let's now play the timeline again and we'll see if the wind is now affecting the superspray particles. Once we've seen that, we'll stop our play and reselect the wind space warp. Back in the right-hand column, the strength setting controls the overall strength of our wind force. Higher values making the wind blow stronger in the direction of the space warp icon. Let's try a strength of 2 and we'll compare that up against the default setting. Let's take that back to 1. Let's see how that would compare by using a 0.5 value. And we'll compare that up against a strength value of 0. Using a negative value, we could push the wind effect in the opposite direction. Let's change the strength to, let's say, -1. If we took that to instead -0.5, the wind would still be traveling in the opposite direction, the force just wouldn't be quite as strong. Let's finish things up with adjusting our strength, taking the value back to 0. Down below that, in the wind section, you've got turbulence, which causes the particles to change course in a more of a random manner. The greater the value of the turbulence, the more aggressive the movement variation. Let's see how things would look if we took our turbulence to 2. Here's 3. And let's also try a setting of 5. So the higher the turbulence, the more varied the wind's effect is on the particles. Let's take the turbulence back to 0. Let's do this. We'll take the strength to 0.3 and the turbulence to 2. The frequency value found below the turbulence would cause the turbulence to vary periodically over time. Now, we won't be able to see much of a difference using it here. Let's take our turbulence back to 0 and our strength to 0.5. If we change the direction of the wind by rotating the space warp icon in the view, we can see what effect it has on the particles. The effect of that icon rotation can even be animated. Let's do this with the wind icon selected and us in the rotate command. Down below our timeline on the right, we'll activate Set Key. You could also use the apostrophe keyboard shortcut if you like. Let's now go to frame 50 and we'll set a key on the space warp icon. We'll then go to frame 100, rotating the icon in the opposite direction. Once we've done that, we'll set another rotate key by typing K. Wanting the wind direction to stay as it is for 30 frames, we'll go to frame 130, setting another key. We'll then go to frame 180, rotate the space warp icon back to its original orientation, and set another key. If we now play things back, we'll see how that looks. Why don't we zoom out a little ways by changing our camera view to the perspective view, and we'll play things again. So that's what's happening with adding wind into a particle effect. Next, we'll take a look at adding gravity. I'll go ahead and save the scene out as Wind Space Warp Completed if you'd like to take a look.